Before Eddie changed the world of rock guitar forever with the band's debut album, he and the boys from Van Halen recorded some demos courtesy of Gene Simmons around 1976. A lot of those tunes went on to become classics that we all know from the band's first couple records, like Somebody Get Me a Doctor. Running with the Devil. On Fire. And of course, many more. But even on the tunes that didn't quite make the cut, there's still some absolutely amazing riffs in there, and I don't see enough people talking about them. So on today's episode of Riff Retrospective, we're going to take a deep dive into the LOST Van Halen riffs. Hey there kids, it's your good buddy Uncle Ben, and I have been on quite the Van Halen kick here lately. I know some of you guys caught me in my buddy Andy Wood's video featuring his incredible Van Hagar era wet, dry, wet pedalboard setup, and I've also been reading the book Eruption here lately. It has been a fantastic read so far. I really recommend checking it out. And just the other day I was in the gym worshiping at the Iron Church like I do, and I thought to myself, rather than listening to music that I need to be learning for gigs, I could be listening to these legendary Van Halen demos instead. So I looked here on YouTube and found them. You can look up like Van Halen Gene Simmons demos or Van Halen Zero, and you'll more than likely find them pretty easily. I was blown away to hear early versions of songs that I knew and loved, and a ton of other tunes that I had never heard before. Some really awesome stuff on there. And some of those riffs just really caught my ear, and I knew I had to learn them, and as soon as I did, I knew I had to show you guys. So on today's video, we're going to be checking out some of my favorite riffs that I found on those super early Van Halen demos. As always, this video is brought to you guys by everybody who supports my channel over on my Patreon page, patreon.com/Ben Eller Guitars. Sign up today, you're going to get access to tons of downloadable tabs, backing tracks, bonus lessons, and so much more. This week, everybody who supports my channel, even at just the $1 a month level, is going to get access to tabs that I made to go along with all these great riffs, as well as a bonus video showing you guys a little peek behind the curtain at what's making this tone tick. So don't delay, sign up today, patreon.com/Ben Eller Guitars. I'll put all the gear details in that Patreon bonus video I'm talking about, but the quick rundown here is I'm playing my Suhr Modern here with a Bareknuckle Holy Diver bridge pickup. I've got that going into a Carl Martin Plexi tone pedal, into my Marshall 1987X 50-watt Plexi, into the Universal Audio aux. Yeah, let's talk riffs. One of the first things that I fell in love with off these demos is the intro and verse of the tune Woman in Love. Now that's not Women in Love, this is singular, Woman in Love. Check it out. God, that is a greasy ass riff. I love that one. It almost sounds like Eddie Van Halen playing guitar for Boston to me, you know? It kind of has that vibe to it. So there's a lot of typical Van Halen stuff here. You got some big major bar chords. Then these little dyads. This is kind of interesting to see him sliding into the D and B string here on the 12th fret before he gives us this little A to E move. He fills in the gaps in that riff with some like trills for the first and third ending, a big old classic slide for the second ending, And then the last time through, he walks us up to A, which is where it goes to for the verse. So cool. So you got that same, major bar chord sliding into the double stops. And then this move now is a D to A kind of sound. And the licks that he plays at the ends of the riff are so cool. I love this one. He plays that at the end of the first and third time through the riff. It sounds really weird on its own. It's like this flat 7, 1, major 7, flat 7 thing. Doesn't really make a lot of sense by theory terms, but it sounds so cool. And then the second and fourth times he plays this ending. Just real loose, kind of bluesy kind of feel. Love how that riff sounds. I was surprised whenever I saw a track on there called Big Trouble. I thought that might have maybe eventually evolved into the David Lee Roth solo album tune that we all know, but there's very little in common with it. It starts off with a very uncharacteristic, finger-picked, almost classical style intro that Eddie plays. And then that builds into another classic rockin' riff that features some of Eddie's signature chord moves and some cool licks, moving up here from the higher register down here to the cash register. So it's kind of unusual to hear Eddie doing that finger picking like you do at the top of this, but when you factor in that Eddie was always really into a lot of progressive bands, if you think about this as something that he might have picked up from like a Yes tune or a Rush song, it kind of starts to make a little bit more sense. He's not really playing this on a clean guitar. He didn't really have a clean amp back then. It was always through the Marshalls, so I assume he's just rolling the volume knob down on the guitar to get the cleaner sound. And these little things, you can just play with the thumb and first finger, just go with the pistol grip here with the pick in hand. And you have some delicate little hammer-ons and pull-offs going on here to those open strings. So be sure to really arch those fingers up whenever you're playing it. Otherwise, you'll mute them out. And then the ones after that are following like a D major, G, and a B power chord that you then just kind of ramp that volume knob up on. Okay, now let's check out the riff that comes up after that one. I love how that one sounds. And here he is again using those triads on the D, G, and B string, something that Eddie would do his entire career. Now this first one that we play has an A in the bass, but we're playing a G triad. And then this one right here with the one finger bar is a D triad, still with that A in the bass. So you kind of have this A bass note tying those two things together while you move those triads around on the D, G, and B strings. That's something that would be copied by 80 million guitar players through the 80s. And then this lick is really fun to play. We got that first here on the G string, and then we move on to the same thing but with the D, capping off with what I think is an A power chord. There's a really big bass lick that Michael Anthony plays over that last chord, so it's a little bit harder to hear, but I'm just excited to hear more of Michael. Michael's playing on these demos is awesome. It is way more up front in the mix. The bass tone is really big, and he really plays his ass off a little bit. It's kind of like they let him off the leash a little bit on those demos, and his playing is so good and funky and ties in with Alex just perfect back there on the drums. Up next, let's check out the intro riff to Babe, Don't Leave Me Alone. that's just a simple kick-ass riff. You got some classic bluesy stuff going on down here at the bottom, and then some big bone-crushing power chords after that. Super simple, really effective. You'll notice on the tab I included some of those ghost notes on the low E in parenthesis. You know, those are like really palm muted. You can barely hear them. They're not really adding in anything to the melody. They're really just there for rhythmic effect. Whenever you hear that riff, it almost seems too simple to be a Van Halen riff. There's nothing super technical about it, no crazy licks or anything. But when you factor in how much the Van Halen brothers have always loved AC/DC, you start to understand where that riff came from. There's nothing in that that couldn't have been on Jailbreak or Highway to Hell or any of those classic albums. So yeah, it's really simple, but in reality it's just Eddie and Alex paying tribute to the guys that inspired them. Something worth noting too is the guitar tone on the album. Whenever you listen to these demos, it's not really the familiar Van Halen 1, Van Halen 2 kind of tone that most of us associate with the early era of the band. I don't know if he was using his legendary 100-watt Marshall on this or not, but whatever it is, it just kind of sounds like any old Marshall. I know we all have like a lot of mystique about that amp, and people talk about if Eddie modified it or how much of it was the Variac and all that kind of jazz. But in reality, it was a totally bone stock Marshall. It was just made on a Wednesday. It was made on a really good day. And it had, you know, the greatest rock guitar player of all time playing through it. That did help a little bit. But something that struck me when I listened to these demos is how this could have just been the guitar tone off of, like, I don't know, a Thin Lizzy album. It just sounds like any other Marshall that was made in this time period. The tone I'm using today is what I associate more with early Van Halen, with the big, you know, complete reverb sound and all that I've got coming through the UA aux. But the tones on this are reasonably dry by contrast. One of the toughest riffs that we're going to talk about comes from the intro of the song Get the Show on the Road. Let's check it out. Yeah, that was take like 27 of that one. That is a pain in the ass to play. It's really fast too. Now you've got that cool A blues scale lick. And then the first time he ends it with this D chord. I'm pretty sure that's where he's playing it. It doesn't sound like he's down here in the open position, and we know how much Eddie loves to play those G and B strings together, so I'm pretty sure he's right there. Bonus points if you tune that B string a little flat like Eddie did back in the day to keep those thirds nice and in tune. After that, the second lick is a little different. Hear that? Instead of it's like a little open A string lead up before you do that pull off. And then you do an A dyad up here. This is just like the fifth and root of an A. After that, he follows that up with one of those big classic Eddie Van Halen pick slides to hand slides. That's the problem. Most people try to do it all with the pick. For one, you're never going to be back here in time, but also it doesn't really sound right. You got to pass it between the hands, from the pick hand to the fretting hand, to get that classic Eddie sound. Slides up the neck there for that big A triad, with a little bit of vibrato on it, partially because it sounds cool and partially just to keep it in tune. And then at the end of the riff he plays this. And you can hear on the record the echoes repeat on that last little G dyad. I assume he was using the Echo Plex at this point. I'm not exactly sure about what they used on the demos. But in this riff, you can hear a lot of Eddie's signature effects in action. There's some like phaser that comes in and out through this riff. I mean, he had to be like tap dancing while he's playing this already brutal to play riff. I don't really know how he managed all that at the same time. That's why he's Eddie Van Halen and we're all humans, right? Thankfully, the verse riff that's after that is a lot more simple to play and it still kicks ass. Check this out. I love this riff. It kind of reminds me of something that would have ended up on like Fair Warning with that kind of mid-tempo, heavy kind of grind to it. Now with this one, it's all pretty simple stuff. You got your A's and C's and G's. And then that lick that he plays, pretty sure that's what's going on. That feels like what Eddie would play right there, right? Little hammer on or slide to your D and then to your C. But notice the little mute right there before you hit that one. Again, it's covered in all kinds of little tiny details like that. Another thing I want you guys to listen to with this track is how a lot of it ended up coming back in the song Romeo Delight, which is another one of my favorites. It's really cool to hear that Taking Whiskey to the Party Tonight lyrics show up in both of those tunes. Up next, I want to talk about the first riff in I Wanna Be Your Lover, which is very different from the Prince song of the same name. Let's check that one out. God, that one is greasy and it's funky. You can really feel how funky the band was at this point from playing all those countless 5-hour-long, cover night sets at bars and clubs in California. This one's really got the funk element to it, and I love it, man. You can really hear how aggressive Eddie's upstrokes are on it. I know a lot of people might be tempted to play this with like downstrokes. It's just not funky enough, and so many of those accents hit on the upbeat. It's nice to have that upstroke locked in right there rhythmically. It really keeps you in the groove a lot better. This song also features a killer guitar solo in it. It really sounds like Eddie was finding his footing in this one. And a great vocal by David Lee Roth. This is, I think, the first time on these demos that I heard the famous, David Lee Roth vocal pinch harmonic, that kind of dual tone high shriek that he does. It's cool to hear that making an appearance. There's some odd stuff on here that David does. There's a few things where he does this like really low, I don't know, like Cookie Monster voice that's kind of goofy and silly, but it's really fun to me to hear it in these tunes. I kind of wonder who told him to stop doing that, because it's not on any of the Van Halen albums that we all know, but it is kind of fun hearing it on this. Peace of Mind is a killer tune I want to show you guys. It starts off with Michael playing a cool bass hook with David singing over it, and then Eddie joins in and just mimics the bass hook. Killer riff. Check this out. Simple, classic Van Halen stuff. Double stops and a couple licks. That's that same move we saw earlier too, where you've got root, natural 7, and flat 7 all existing in the same riff. Yeah, Eddie could get away with all the stuff that doesn't make any music theory sense because he just played it with such swagger and confidence and sleaze, He could get away with murder on that thing, even though that doesn't necessarily fit into a scale, God forbid, right? Let's Get Rockin' does indeed rock. This again gives me that Boston vibe, but like Boston on a lot harder intoxicants. Let's check this one out. God, that's such a sick riff. You got your classic A to C thing with your A pedal tone under it first. Then we have our first chord move. Kind Kind of going there from your major to sus with a hammer on, typical Eddie move, before you move it down a step. And then he plays this lick. Now, I'm not exactly sure if I'm doing this right, because this just does not feel like something Eddie would play. It's kind of an odd one, right? F sharp, A, and C. Little string skipping thing. That doesn't feel Eddie, but I can't figure out any other way he would be playing those notes and getting that slide down sound. It's kind of odd. Now after that, he plays the A to C thing again. And then the same sus chord move, but up a step. And he has a little variation on that weird lick we talked about earlier. He just plays straight down it with no string skipping. I tried searching all over the place for any footage of the band playing that song live so I could confirm that that's what he's doing, but I couldn't find any. If you know where any footage of any of these songs is, please be sure to link it down there in the comments section. I would love to see if I'm close to playing any of these riffs right. You never really know with Eddie. Plus, you never really know because he would play stuff live differently than he played it on the records all the time. So even if we did have footage of this, who knows if I'm doing it right. But of course, as you know, that's pretty typical of Eddie's playing. We can all only take a guess at what he was doing or playing or thinking about when he put together these awesome riffs. Best we can hope to do is try to follow along and keep up, which is pretty wild considering some of these riffs are like almost 50 years old. It's pretty mind-blowing stuff. So there you go, guys, a deep dive into the legendary Lost Van Halen riffs, but I'm sure I left your favorites off. So be sure to let me know in the comments section what they are, and maybe I'll do a part 2 of this video sometime in the future. And be sure to give those Gene Simmons Van Halen demos a listen. You can find them here on YouTube without too much trouble. They are so raw, and they're so, I don't know, rockin' and just wild sounding. It's pretty incredible to think about Eddie and Alex and Michael and David all being as young as they were and sounding as developed as they were when they were so young at this point. It's kind of mind-boggling. And it's crazy because you can find like 30-something different demo tunes they put together that would carry the band over their next, I don't know, 5 records. Kind of insane. Be sure to grab the tabs and that bonus tone video over on my Patreon page at patreon.com/Ben Eller Guitars. Tons of other cool stuff is over there waiting for you. And be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, all that other good stuff before you head on out the door. Thanks as always for watching. Now it's time for me to get out of here and explore some more classic Van Halen licks. I recommend you guys do the same. Let's click in. More picking.